Hello everybody, my name's Nemo and welcome back to the Jules the Planeswalkers 2013. This is the tier list Redux video. So, after the whole tier list stuff, I made some better builds for my decks. I never sit still. I'm always changing and experimenting with my decks. And after the tier list video, I also posted it on the forums for the Wizards forums for Jules the Planeswalkers, and got some feedback on it. And with all that information and with my restless mind, I guess we'll call it, I've been trying some new builds, and I've been able to get some better results with some of the decks. So I want to do a redux for the whole tier list stuff, because I want to have like one place where people can come and see what's up. I don't want to be like, well, this deck is now tier yada yada, this deck is now tier yada yada, and have that connect to the previous videos. No, I want to have one video or two. If this video turns out to be a little bit too long, then I will cut it up into two. But what I'm trying to say is that I want it to be clear for new subscribers or just people who haven't seen the previous videos what the hell is going on and what my decks look like. So I want to have one good place for that. So that's what I'm doing now, and I'm updating everything. So I won't be spending too long about every deck, because I do want to make this one, maybe two videos. So let's get this party started then. Quickly move over to the deck manager and talk about the first one. Oh, actually, I should tell you, I'm now doing it in 5 tiers rather than 4. I was using 4 tiers previously, with the highest deck being like tier 0, whatever. But now I think with some of the decks, many decks have been performing better, so they've been moved onto the highest tier, tier 1, and that made it really, that made it there were too many decks in tier 1, so it didn't make too much sense anymore, and I figured that, I better split that up into 2 tiers. So it's now, what used to be tier 4 is now tier 5, what used to be tier 3 is now tier 4, what used to be tier 2 is now tier 3, what used to be tier 1 is now tier 2 and tier 1, and a lot of decks have switched and moved up to tier 2 or tier 1 from the previous ones. So there's 4 decks in tier 5, 4 decks in tier 4, 4 decks in tier 3, 4 decks in tier 2, and 5 decks in tier 1. So that's the new thing, and it makes more sense like this. So let's quickly talk about everything. So the first deck is still Rogue's Gallery, is still the lowest ranking deck. It's not a horrible deck, because none of the decks in Jules of the Planeswalkers 2013 are horrible, like there were some horrible decks in Jules of the Planeswalkers 2012. But this deck is scoring the lowest, and the reason is that it both has some problems with its removal, because its removal is very conditional. If something has more than 3 toughness, good luck trying to kill it. It does have some other removal that may work. It has a counterspell here, and it has Baron Spite, and this is also very conditional, but you kind of need it, because the rest of the removal is so crappy. Well, not really crappy, but conditional. I don't dislike Agony Warp. It's not a horrible card. In fact, it's a very good card. The problem is just that, it's better to have a few of these and a whole load of Go for the Throats, So that would have been better. What also would have helped this deck is a lot of repulse or bounce action. As it is, the only bounce you get is from Baron Spite. That's not enough. If this is a discard deck, then what would have really helped is to just bounce some stuff up to their hand and then smash them with Dimir Cutpurse and make them discard what you just bounced. That would have been a very sweet, combination. That's what I expect from a blue-black deck, is that kind of, stuff, but that isn't really in this deck, so it's a little bit disappointing. It does have some very powerful creatures though. Grim is ridiculously powerful. Some of these other 5-drops and even some of the 4-drops are really good, but that's not enough. The removal suite is too conditional. Even this 5-cost removal spell only works if they only have 4 toughness and not more. So but they're good spells, they're not bad spells. It's just that, if sometimes you really need to just kill something, and this doesn't always do it. So that's a problem it has. The other problem it has is that the discard is a little bit late. Oftentimes, by the time you get to really discard their whole hand, they've already played their biggest threats or their best creatures, or at least something that's bigger than your creatures, because your creatures aren't that big. So you get into trouble with that. So that's the reason this isn't the best deck. In fact, it's the worst deck, but it's not a horrible deck. You can make something happen with the deck. You can win, definitely win. I just wish it was a little bit better, but you know, sadly. Anyways, we're moving on to the next deck here, and it's really close by. It's Active War. Same story here with the removal. Again, free damage. That's the biggest you can do. So you need to double up if something has more than 3 toughness, and that is costly at times. The other problem it has is that it tries to be an aggressive deck, but the aggressive creatures aren't good enough. This is a 1/1 for 1. It just isn't good enough. You can make him bigger. You know, it's too much effort to make a 1-cost guy bigger though. And these buff spells that are supposed to win you games oftentimes end up hurting you instead. So you know, it's a little bit unfortunate. And this deck really relies on some of the bigger creatures, because those bigger creatures are really good. Just like in Rogue's Gallery, the biggest creatures are really good for their cost. So, for instance, Balefire Leech is one of the best creatures in the game. So you really get the best way to build it is to just try and stall and get to that. But your creatures aren't really made for stalling. For instance, this is a haste guy. So you know, an evasion haste guy isn't really meant to stall the game, but it is a good creature, so it's in there. But you know, either way, you do have a lot of life gain. So this deck can definitely win. It's just, you know, it's not the best deck. So that's the problem it has. Either way, last time you saw it, I had Balefire Dragon in there. I took him out again. You know, it's still 7 mana is too much, but I wish this guy would work, because he's actually decent removal, which this deck seems to be lacking. So Face Feathers is the best removal you got though. That's definitely great. And sometimes you win games out of nowhere with Scourging Novelist. So it's not a bad deck. Again, none of the decks are bad, but it is low in the food chain, so to speak. So moving on to the next deck in tier 5. It's got to be Dream Puppets right here. Dream Puppets is a mill deck, or at least it tries to be a mill deck. But if you build it like that, then you end up giving your opponent a lot of cards and a lot of choices. And that makes it difficult for you to survive when the only fog-like type of effect you have is sleep, which isn't really good enough as a one-off. So if there are multiple cards like this and better ones than this one in the deck, then maybe it would work. You know, you're making your opponent draw a lot of cards, but as long as you can keep them from killing you each and every turn, then they eventually mill out. So that would work. That's called a Turbo Fog deck. This isn't that, but it tries to be, and it kind of fails. Because, you know, it doesn't have enough to keep it going. But what it does have is a lot of card drawing and a lot of control-y effects and a lot of trying to use your opponent's creatures against them. So that's what I built it for mostly. And the only change I made since the last time you saw it is to add Archive Trap. Archive Trap is useful in that there's a lot of decks that run like Terramorphic Expanse or the other one, and you can, or Evolving Wilds, and you can Archive Trap them for 0 when that happens, and that's really good. There's a bit of tutoring in this game as well, so you can use this against that. And you know, the thing is, this immediately guarantees that there are 13 cards. Just one card and it's 13. You know, otherwise you have to use multiple cards to get there. You have to use a combination of a Hedron Crab and a land, and getting them with like, you know, one of these that I'm not even running. So it tends to be a little bit difficult, but it is important to have them have 10 cards in the graveyard, because then your Jace's Phantasms start to do stuff. So it's a balancing act between running too much mill and not enough mill. And I think this card really helps there, but it is an expensive card if it doesn't happen that you can play it for 0. But I do think it's worth running. So anyways, I think I took out Mind Control for it. I think I was running 2 of those. So either way, now we've got one Body Double, one Mind Control. I think Mind Control overall is a little better than the Body Double, but it helps to have options. And the reason Mind Control is better, it is in this build, because I'm not really milling them. I'm milling them like 13 cards, 16, maybe 20 cards, and then relying on the Jace's Phantasms and other stuff to give me the victory. So that means that there's more threats still in their deck than they're gonna be in a graveyard, and that makes Mind Control more important than Body Double. But you know, having that option is pretty good, and Body Double also gets your creatures from the graveyard, so you know, either way, that's pretty much the build, and that's pretty much this deck. It's not a great deck, but it can win. It can certainly work, and there are some decks that are weak to Dream Puppets, so for instance the Mana Mastery deck. So there are a bunch of decks that are really resilient to this deck that you'll have a lot of trouble beating. Like for instance Born of Flame, there's not a lot of chance that you can defeat Born of Flame with Dream Puppets. But there are other decks, like for instance Obedient Dead and Mana Mastery, and some of them are really good decks too, that this deck does really well against, because their creatures are strong. So what you're going to use against them is their creatures, so you're going to have strong creatures to use against them, etc. And they're also a little bit slow, so being able to make those tempo plays is useful against those. So, and creature based, of course, that's important too. So it works really well against some decks, doesn't work at all against other decks, and that's what places in tier 4 really. So we're moving on to the next deck in tier 4, Celestial Light. And this deck is, you know, it's an interesting deck. It's a life gain deck. I'm not a huge fan of this because it tends to make games really long that you already know you've won. If you're playing against this deck, then, you know, sometimes you just have the better board position, the better card advantage, you have everything better, but they have 200 life, and it takes a while to kill them, and then they play one of these and double the life total, and you're like, come on man, this could have been over an hour ago. And it gets a little frustrating to play against this deck because you know you've won, but it just takes forever. So that's kind of how I think about this deck. I don't really like playing against it that much. I don't like playing with it either. But, you know, it's not a horrible deck. You know, it's just an annoying deck to play against. But other than that, you know, it has card disadvantage a lot of the times because its cards try to give you life as well as do something. But the thing that they do, aside from giving you life, is not that great usually, because they're otherwise weak cards, aside from just giving you life, although Baneslayer is really good though. So you really need to draw a few key cards to make this deck work. You need to, first of all, you need to get to 30 life to be able to get these Serra Ascendants to do well. And if you can do that, and if you can stay at 30 life, then this deck does really well. Another way to win is get these Asiani Pridemates really big and maybe put a Basilisk Collar on those. That works really well. The Knight of Meadowgrain with Basilisk Collar is also pretty good, but not really a win condition. And aside from that, it's just, you know, stalling and playing a lot of, you know, Day of Judgment, and recycling your deck with the Elixir of Immortality, playing another Day of Judgment when you draw it again, etc, etc. This is basically a better Turbo Fog than the mill deck is when it comes to that, because you can just keep cycling out these Day of Judgments and keep playing them. So once this deck does get going, it's pretty strong, and eventually you'll draw into like a huge White Sun Zenith that ends the game, or you'll get your Well of Lost Dreams. If you get Well of Lost Dreams, this deck is really good, as long as they don't immediately get rid of it. And you may eventually win with Felidar Sovereign if you like at 400 life. They spent all their removal getting rid of all your dudes, and it's a really long and drawn out game, and Felidar Sovereign can win you the game. Of course, it can also happen that they just end up top decking their removal spell that turn, and you know, then you lose your Felidar Sovereign. It's another 200 turns until either you or the opponent wins the game. It takes a long time. But either way, that's pretty much the strategy with this deck. Just stall, 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 and eventually drop a win condition. But you know, it can make for some really long and boring games, and especially in other formats than 1v1, for instance in free for all, it can get really annoying and obnoxious to play against this deck. So I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of its inclusion, but it is, you know, it is a typical white deck though with the life gain. I guess, you know, it's one of those archetypes. So either way, we'll move on to the next tier and the next deck. We're moving on to tier 4. So these 4 decks just shows you where the tier 5, the weakest decks in the game. We're gonna move over to tier 4, the a little bit weaker, a little bit stronger decks than that. As you can see, Celestial Light had a win-loss ratio of 1.6. So there's not a lot of difference between Rogue's Gallery with the 1.5 and 1.6 from Celestial Light, so not a big difference between those decks. Now we're moving on to quite a bit of difference between the Celestial Light and the next deck. Oh, why am I like spinning the whole round just to get to the next deck in whatever. Anyway, so Sky and Scale is the next one. It's a 2.2 win-loss ratio, so that's a pretty big difference between this one and Celestial Light, and that's why we're moving up a tier. The last time you saw this, I was running a slower deck, a slower build for this deck, where I was focusing a lot on Fable of Wolfenal. I had 3 of those in the deck. I changed the deck build around a little bit after some suggestions to play it more aggressively, and so I'm now running it more aggressively than I was at first. But I still don't think this deck is performing that much better. It is performing better, but not a huge difference. It went from a 2.0 win-loss to a 2.2 win-loss ratio, so not a huge difference here, but it is performing better, so better build, better performance. Still not a huge fan of the Selkie Hedge Mage, but I've seen it work against me. Especially one the game where I reanimated something and they just bounced it back to my hand, and I'm like, shit, now I'm 3 turns behind from doing the whole reanimation trick with Grinning Malice and everything. So it can be good, but it can also just not really do anything, or not do the thing you want it to do. If you have 2 forests and you want it to bounce something, or you have 2 islands and you really need to gain the life. Or for instance, if the guy you really need to bounce isn't tapped or has vigilance or whatever, then it can be a feel bad card when it doesn't work, but it can be useful when it does work. So I took out the acidic slimes because I'm just way too pressed with all these good cards at 5 mana. Like this guy can be a game winner. This guy is definitely a game winner, and this is just really a really important tempo play. So I really just don't think there's room for acidic slime anymore. There's too much stuff you have to play because you're counting on these to win you the game. If your earlier cards don't make it, and they often don't because they're not extremely powerful. So either way, that's the build for this deck. More aggressive this time around. So we'll be moving on to the next deck, which is right here, Pack Instinct. Pack Instinct does a little bit better, 2.24. Still haven't changed anything about this build. I have. I added the Vanguard Firstborns after seeing it work pretty well against me. I think it's a recorded game in the Winner Swap series where I lost to Pack Instinct with none other than Obedient Dead after getting an 8 win in a row, 8 wins in a row. I lost to Pack Instinct, unfortunately, because the Vanguard Firstborn was exactly what I didn't want him to draw. Like that was the perfect draw for him, and he had that, and it was a little bit unfortunate. So, anyways, I also added the Spider instead of the Stomp Howler because getting rid of artifacts and enchantments is great, but I think this deck loses to flying more than it does to artifacts and enchantments. So I think this guy is more important. And really, this isn't the kind of deck where it's so powerful that your only thing you need to worry about is artifacts and enchantments. There's a lot more to worry about. So I don't think you really need those guys to do well. Like for instance, in a stronger deck, I'm more inclined to add cards like this because they fill up weaknesses that the deck has. But this is a weaker deck, so it has more weaknesses. So there's not that much point in bringing in something to deal with that, and especially I think flying is a bigger weakness than artifacts and enchantments, like I said. So, and what else did I take out here? I took out 1 Timber Maul Larva and something else that I don't really remember right now, I must say. Probably a 6-drop, probably a Rampaging Baloths. I didn't find 6-drops to be too much use aside from the epic proportions, which does something the turn I play it. And this guy, they never see this coming because I don't think anybody runs it, even though it's a great card. But it gives your dude trample, so they like chump block something huge, and you're like, well, dude, it has trample. GG. It's a pretty hilarious card, so really good. I like it a lot. So anyways, I also saw the Grook's pack leaders can be powerful, but this isn't really the build in which they shine. My build is pretty fast, so but if you have a slower build, Grook's pack leader is strong, but you know, not for this build though. So moving on from Pack Instinct to a deck that is pretty similar, because the way you win with Pack Instinct is you... Sorry about this, going back in there. Is you pretty much just have one dude and you enchant him with like... hopefully the dude is hexproof or has trample. You enchant him with a Blanchwood armor and you play some Primal Bellows and you get in a lot of damage out of nowhere. That's the main win... The main way to win with this deck, which is why these Timbermaw Larvas are important, the hexproof guys are important, which is why this guy is good, because he can double his power, you know. That's the main way I win, is to just bring out a lot of damage out of nowhere. The other way to build this is to go for the ramp build and have a lot of dudes late game. But I think this build is slightly better than that, but it's pretty close though. So from here we move on to a deck that also has that ID, which is Berserker Rage. I like Gruul, I do pretty well with Gruul. So a small change I made here is I took out one Terramorphic Expanse. As you can see in the latest of the Winner Swap series, I lost because I kept getting... I just got land flooded, so I think one less land might do the trick. I'm very... You know, I'm very low mana curve, but... anyways, so I added a Colossal Might and I added another Colossal Might and took out a Branching Bolt as well, because I'd rather trample over stuff than have to actually kill it, you know, why not? I'm going all in on the aggressive strategy, so I think Colossal Might is more important than Branching Bolt. So I think, you know, oftentimes if you don't draw Colossal Might, you end up not winning the game, and if you do draw it, you end up winning the game. So that's usually how this ends up. So 2 more Colossal Mights in this deck, and I think the deck should perform better. Anyway, so moving on to the next deck in Tier 4. Another deck I changed quite a bit of actually in this one. Mindstorms. This used to be the lowest deck in Tier. What used to be Tier 3. It's now Tier 4, but this used to be the lowest deck in this tier. It's now the highest deck. And just look at how many 3-drops I'm running. I used to be running a lot of 5-drops, and I used to just go for trying to slow the game down, trying to keep the opponent busy with the mana leaks and all that, and then win with a huge 5-drop and a lot of spells in a row, and getting crazy with the time warps and all that. But now I'm no longer counting on that. Instead, I try to win earlier than that with these wee Dragonauts, because these wee Dragonauts are actually pretty good if you build a deck around using them and getting in early damage. And the way to do that is to just run a lot of cheap sorceries and instant spells. So that works better, I think. And now the 5-drops I run is no creature at all here, because 5-cost creatures are a little too slow. Instead I run game winners like Prophetic Bolt and Time Warp, and I no longer need the Beacon of Destruction either. I was running this because the deck being a little slow, sometimes you really had to deal with like a Baneslayer Angel or something. But if the deck is faster, you probably don't need to deal with it anyway. So you don't need to run the Beacon of Destruction, you can run all the Prophetic Bolts and the Time Warps and be happy that way. So I think this deck is pretty good this way. So yeah, now these Acted Treasons and the Reverberate are better because I'm running more instants and sorceries and I'm going for a faster victory. I'm no longer really that concerned about card advantage. So now these cards really come to their right and do a better job in this build than they would have in the other build, where I didn't include them. So I'm also running 2 Quicksilver Daggers now. I really like the card actually, so still running the 1 of the elements. These are my plan B, but if I draw these, you know, I'm usually winning when I draw 1 of the elements, because these are so good. I really love these cards. So anyways, going for a faster victory, and the deck really has improved quite a bit with this build. It does a lot better, so really nice build. These guys are still too expensive though. And Thunderstrike, I mean, you could include Thunderstrike, but like every other spell does the same thing that Thunderstrike does, and Schism Motivate usually does a better job of it too. So like your other spells can also be removal, and that is a little bit more I think the other instants and sorceries are a little bit more reliable, or at least you have more options with them. So I don't think there's really a need for these Thunder Strikes, but they're fun though, and you could include them if you really want them though. But I think those are the ones that have to be excluded here. So that's the new build, much faster, much more aggressive, and more fun to play too. To be honest, more fun to play. So we'll be moving on to tier 3 now after tier 4. And in tier 3 we've got Grinning Malice. So Grinning Malice is the lowest deck in tier 3. Still a pretty good deck. I keep changing this deck because I'm a player who really likes consistency, and Grinning Malice doesn't provide that. It provides random effects, a lot of random effects. And sometimes this deck does really well, sometimes it doesn't do that well. I try to make it as consistent as possible, and I try to include only those random cards that I really need, like Chaos Warp. Turns out you pretty much do need these cards, especially in this slower version of the deck than I was running at first. I didn't use to run Grave Titan, for instance, so... but it did make this deck a little bit faster than the last time you saw it. I got the Typhoid Rats in there again. I prefer those over the Onyx Mage, because you don't need to spend mana to make these have Death Touch. So, I don't know. Don't need to keep mana open. It's pretty good. I'm usually struggling for mana with this deck as it is. So, either way, one Sootstow Kindler just because he's awesome with Grave Titan. And I included the Spite Flame Witch because, you know, I include those guild mages in Grim Procession, so why not just include this as well? Basically does the same thing but cheaper, and you're usually using those to make people lose life anyway. Plus this gets by some stuff that you might otherwise not be able to deal with, because it makes them lose life rather than just take damage, so why not? Seems pretty good. These guys actually have been doing a great job for me. And I definitely prefer them over the Blood Cultists now. Actually, especially, you know, if you're killing a lot of stuff, and that usually happens, there's a lot of chaos going on. These guys can really grow big, and you don't need to do some weirdness with this. You can just, you don't need to like tap it and not use it, because that's the problem with the Blood Cultist. You have to not use it to make it bigger, or at least not be attacking with it. And this guy you can be attacking and making it bigger. So I think I prefer these. But yeah, I included the third Wrecking Ball now instead of the one Bituminous Blast I was running. I just got land screwed too much. Too many 5-drops, and I'm definitely not excluding a Demigod, because these Demigods are better the more you have of them. So I definitely think it's more, even though I think Bituminous Blast is probably more powerful than like a 4th Demigod, but the fact that the Demigods get better the more you have of them outweighs that. So I'd rather have the 4 Demigods. The full pack of Demigods, basically. And Heat Shimmer is a great card, by the way. This guy I have in there because sometimes I found I didn't have the reach to end my opponent's life. And this hopefully will get me there. It's been doing a bit of a job, but, you know... Anyways, Dragon Master Outcast is still a great guy, by the way. That guy just wins me so many games out of nowhere, because people never think this guy is good. Anyways, took out the Singebind Ogres again, making the mana curve a little bit better. And I don't see people playing Mana Mastery that much anymore, and that's why I included it for Mana Mastery, because he does well against Mana Mastery. But since people don't play that anymore, I don't want it. Oh yeah, and I took out the Reanimates. I took out these Blood Chief Ascensions. Not a huge fan of those anymore. They just don't work that often. And Reanimate, I'm no longer really a fan of the whole Reanimate strategy where you skip a turn and then put something in the graveyard and then you reanimate it early. And then usually what ends up happening is you take a lot of damage for doing that. They kill that guy, you're 2 turns behind, and you lose the game. That usually is what happens because, you know, this metagame is better than it was in 2012. But even in 2012, I think I eventually took out the one Reanimate in Ghoulkeeper as well, for the same reason. You know, people are playing better. I'm running into more competition and just better players overall. So I think Reanimate doesn't do the trick anymore. And otherwise, the only thing you're using it for is to get something big back late game. But then, you know, if you're losing the race, you don't want to take the damage often. So I think Reanimate is not that great of a card anymore. And it ends up screwing me over more than the opponent. So I don't like it that much anymore. I toyed around with the idea of adding an avatar of Discord, because if you have 3 demigods, yeah, I know, like, that's asking a lot. Like, you have to have this guy and 3 demigods, but then you play this, discard 2 demigods, and then turn 5 you play demigod as well, and that's like 20 damage right there. That's pretty ridiculous, but you know, that's the perfect time with this guy. If you don't have demigods, you're sad because you're discarding 2 cards. So yeah, don't really like the card anyways. But it's a funny thought though. And I think I was running 2 Grave Titans at first. Again, helping out the mana curve, I was getting mana screwed a bit too much. So and for some reason, in between all of that, I had 11 mountains and 9 swamps. Now I have 9 mountains and 11 swamps. So I'm happy there, because you definitely need swamps more than mountains in this deck. So don't know how it happened though. Either way, we're moving on to the next deck here. Exalted Darkness. So I don't think I changed anything about Exalted Darkness. Just a good deck. Oh yeah, actually I did. I added a Battle Grace Angel. I'm lying again. I added Battle Grace Angel instead of Divinity of Pride. To be honest, I don't really know why I wasn't running the Battle Grace Angel anyway. Because I already need double white for Sublime Archangel. Because I think that's the only reason I wouldn't run it. But anyways, I think he's better though. He just... you need to rely on Exalted for this guy to actually have the lifelink. But the fact that he comes down, and the turn he comes down, you already gain the life from the other guy attacking. That's really what pushes this guy to be better than Divinity of Pride, I think. And now that I'm running one of each, I have options as well. I don't know. Seems good to me. Other than that, I took out these Cathedral of Wars. I think I got a little bit color screwed one turn, so instead I'm running the Evolving Wilds now in one game. I think it was the game I lost for the Winner Swap series with this deck, where I got color screwed on a certain color, and I was like, why am I actually running these Cathedral of Wars? They're kind of a liability, and I do so much damage that I don't need the +1 power from the Cathedral of War anyway. And I'm not even, like, there are games where I'm not even counting on Exalted at all, and then this is just a dead card. So, because sometimes, like for instance against decks that keep on bouncing your dudes, you want to be attacking with multiple dudes, and so you don't get the bonus from this dude. So, this land there, this card, this discard, discarding. Anyways, so that's Exalted Darkness, pretty good deck though, and it works really well for me. So moving on to the next deck, wrong blue deck right there. This one, Crosswinds. Haven't changed that much since the first time since the deck build. I think I changed one card here, adding flow over IDs, and I don't even know what I took out for it. Probably let's see here. Oh yeah, one of the Telrann's Invocations, because I just can't find anything else to take out. But it's difficult in this deck because every card is pretty much needed. Like this build is pretty much, there isn't a lot you can change about this without, hurting the deck. Certainly there are some cards that aren't really needed, but they are really powerful. So I really don't see a way to... For instance, a lot of people want me to add Azure Mages, but I just don't see what card I have to cut to add an Azure Mage, because I think Fogbank is way better than Azure Mage, and any other card, I just can't imagine what to take out. I don't see it. Like, what would I take out for an Azure Mage? You tell me, I don't know. All these cards are good, so all these cards are game winners too. Like Rite of Replication on Spiketail Drake, game winner. Rite of Replication on Sphinx, game winner. Like so many game winning cards here that I just can't find anything I wanted to cut. So, anyways, and also I haven't seen Azure Mage used against me that well in the past. I've seen it work once when I was playing this deck as well, and I was getting land screwed, and that's the kind of game where a card like this is useful. but even then it wasn't too useful for him, and I copied it and used it against him, and etc. So I don't know. I haven't seen it do too much work. But you know, I'm all about the tempo play. So, anyways, moving on. That's Crosswinds for you. Good deck though, very good deck. And the next deck is right here, Ancient Wilds. I'm just so blind for it, you know. I can't see it for some reason. But anyways, Ancient Wilds is the next deck here, and it is a pretty good deck. I don't think I changed anything since the last time I showed you, although I might have. I may have added the wild pair since last time, and took out Elder Scale Worm probably. Yeah, I think I keep experimenting with the Elder Scale Worm, but last time I was experimenting with it, and now I'm not anymore, and you know, whatever. But I think this is a good build though. And you can tweak it a little bit. Some cards can be useful in this build, in this deck that I don't include. Like for instance, Color of the Claw can be useful. Spawn Drive may be useful sometimes, especially if you couple it with Beast Within on the guy that blocks it. Because then, since it has trample, it gets in, and sometimes Spawn Drive can really get out of control. But that's a little bit too much hassle, and this deck doesn't really want to be aggro anyway, so I don't think it's the perfect way to go here. Vengevine is pretty good if you're aggro as well. And Stinger Fling Spider can be useful, especially to tutor for if you need him. But then there are so many good 5-drops here that I can't find a room for it, you know. So I just can't find room for it. So the cards that people play, like Giganomancer and this dude, I don't think those are good. I haven't needed them. They're usually a liability. If you have them in your hand, you're sad. And sometimes you natural order for it at the wrong time, and the opponent has a way to deal with it, and then you're in trouble. So I don't know. It hasn't been that useful, and I usually don't need it, because if I'm natural ordering, like getting Gaia's Revenge is usually just the way to go, because that thing, this guy hits like a truck and they can't target it. Like, what the heck? He's already so good. You don't need these ridiculous 8-drops. And this guy, if you draw him, at least you can probably play him. Whereas these 8-drops, by the time you play them, it's too late oftentimes. So I'd rather have something more consistent than that. You know me, I'm all about the consistency. So that's pretty much Ancient Wilds though. Good deck, works well, and I'm all about the whole land destruction theme now. I wasn't that much at first, but I've seen it do work, and if you run all the acidic slimes and you run 2 of these, you've got enough bounce to make it work, you know. So if you can get there early to bounce acidic slimes and destroy all the lands, or even sometimes just using 1 acidic slime to blow up 1 key land can be enough. So it's pretty good, and otherwise you can go crazy with the Frag Dust. This deck has an early game strategy, it has a late game strategy, pretty much is everything. It just isn't always the most powerful deck, and some decks have more powerful plays than this one has, and it can be a little slow, but other than that it's a great deck. So it's definitely top of tier 3.